العالمين والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So last time I left off discussing the different tools that the mujtahid, or the different tools that a legal theorist will use in order to help him deal with the nusus, in order to help him deal with the different texts. How do I deal with a verse when I come across it? How do I engage with a text? How do I engage with a hadith when I come across it? If I have two hadith or verses that are apparently contradictory, how do I reconcile them, right? And these are very important skills for an individual to have in order to actually engage with the Qur'an and engage with the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all of this, these are all theoretical categorizations of how a hadith is classified. So you have here, and again, you have something that is mass transmitted and you have something that is non-mass transmitted, right? And this is the only difference between them. While there is a difference of understanding on which a hadith actually qualify, or which narrations qualify as mass transmitted, in general, most of what we have today is ahad, right? Most of what we have today is ahad. And we had spoken examples of things that are mass transmitted. So when we talk about things that are mass transmitted in the religion, what examples did we give, or what examples can you guys think of?
Then anybody who makes up stuff.
I'm sorry?
Anybody who makes up stuff on behalf of the Prophet.
Okay, yeah, so this is one of the few ahadith that are considered to be mutawatir by some scholars. But an example now, what are we? Does anybody know? We're in Muharram. Like, who told you it was Muharram? Google told us? No, I'm being very honest. Who told you it was Muharram?
It's a pattern. We see it once.
Huh?
Who told you we're in August?
Exactly. No, these are all very, very valid questions. How do you know today's Wednesday? Huh? Muslim Pro? Is that how it is? How do you know today's Wednesday? Also Muslim Pro? Huh? How do you know the calendar's right?
Because nobody knows the century, but mostly.
What are the chances of that?
Less than 1%. But yeah, it's ultimately possible. You're right.
So this is what mass transmission is. Like when things that we inherit from the previous generation, and there's no need to accept it. What is the purpose of doubting today being Wednesday? Is it possible that all of mankind got together and decided, like, haha, we're going to trick the next generation into thinking we're actually one day ahead of the day that we're in, right? Or that month of Muharram, or for example, where the Kaaba is today. Is it possible that 1,400 years ago the Kaaba was in a different place? Does it make sense that you would have a generation and be like, oh, let's shift it 5 feet, and then the next generations will never know what happened here? Huh? I'm sorry? Which is definitely possible, but how is it that all of mankind has agreed upon these things? Like, for example, has anybody here ever been to Tokyo? I think you have. Yeah, I already asked this question before, man. I forgot. Right, so with the exception of Warsan, right? Has anybody else here ever been to Tokyo? Does anybody deny that it exists? Or the country of Japan? How come, even though you've never seen it or experienced it, how can we say for surety that it's there? It's because the Toyotas magically appear, right? The bird brings them down in the crane, right? Now, because again, this is something that as mankind, it's not possible that they came together to lie about this magical place that exists, right? These places are real, they exist, and these that are inherited and things that we have inherited. And this is the benefit of things that are mass transmitted. Religiously, what are some things that have been mass transmitted to us?
Qur'an.
Huh?
Qur'an.
Okay, the Qur'an, right? Absolutely, for sure. What else? Okay, the hadith as a whole, and it's the same thing with the Qur'an, right? As a whole, the Qur'an has been passed to us. As a whole, the hadith have been passed to us, for sure. Now, the minutia, like qira'at, for example, can those be argued? Yes, I think there's an argument that's there. When it comes to specific hadith, I think that there's definitely an argument there for them to be ahad. What are some things that we take for granted that are part of the religion that we've just kind of inherited? Like, for those of you here, and I'll just give one example, the prayer. Did we go and examine every single hadith about how to pray, and then we came to our conclusion on how we're going to pray? You would be hard pressed, and in the ummah today, a person who actually went to a fiqh book and learned how to pray in that way. Why? It's just something that we kind of inherited, right? So this idea of 5 prayers, did I have to go and learn it, or is it something that we as an ummah have kind of inherited and passed down? The idea of zakat, the idea of fasting, the idea of hajj, right? These are things that as an ummah we've inherited from the previous generations, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They're clearly mass transmitted, right? There's no difference of opinion on these things. And a huge example of this is when a person wants to embrace Islam, what do they say? Huh? They say the entire shahada, right? They say, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Where do you find this stated in a hadith? This entirety? Huh? This one, but over here, is it say this is what you say to take your shahada or come to Islam? Right? And even the hadith that talk about it, they say La ilaha illallah. For this, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, you have a very few hadith, the most famous one being in Musnad Ahmad. Think of it, this is a pillar of Islam, and you just have 1 or 2 hadith talking about this as an entirety in this entire statement. Something that we wouldn't even think, right? It's just something that we take for granted. Why? Because of this idea of mass transmission, that we as an ummah have inherited these ideas. We as an ummah have inherited many of these concepts. And based on that, it helps me as a Muslim understand that these 5 pillars are actually what? Are they important or not? Right, not just very important. Like, we take these to be pillars. Like, we really take these to be pillars. And why? Because the entire ummah of Muhammad ﷺ has inherited these pillars generationally. So a mass transmitted report is one that gives certainty, and there's no doubt, right? So we say the oneness of Allah, the messengership of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are things that are a fundamental part of the religion without any doubt. Now, things that are not mass transmitted. So when we talk about the 5 pillars of Islam, this we agree upon. When we talk about the 6 pillars of Iman, this is something that we agree upon. What are some other things in the religion that we agree upon as a community?
The forbiddance of alcohol,
the major things that are forbidden in Islam. So what are the major things, like you mentioned, like killing, shirk, lying? I'm sorry? Homosexuality. Right, so these are things that we as an ummah have, yes. Eating pork, yes, absolutely. And these are things that we've inherited as an ummah. These things as a whole. Tayyib, what are things that aren't? Huh? Music? Did somebody say music?
Yeah.
Yes, music is an excellent example. Right, this is not something that we have inherited generationally that everybody agrees to be impermissible. What else? I'll take it even a step further. Belief in Dajjal. Allah. So is it possible to be Muslim and not believe in Dajjal?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Why? Because it's not something that was mutawatir. It's not something that's mass transmitted. What else? Tattoos. It's another good example, right? And the reason I say this is because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended to prohibit something very clearly, then what would I do? I would see it. I would have see a very clear prohibition in something that has been passed down. And the reason I'm mentioning these examples is not because I'm giving permission. That's not the point behind this. The point behind this is there are some things that are considered muhkamat, right? These are things that are established in the religion for surety, there's no doubt. These other things, okay, about it. Like, we can definitely talk about, and you might have a very strong argument for your, you know what I mean? You have a very strong argument against tattoos. You have a very strong argument against music, for example, right? Like, you have arguments for these things, but at the end of the day, they are what? They are arguments. Versus, can anybody come to me now and say, well, lying actually, well, 5 prayers, really? No, I mean, Fajr's kind of tough. These are things that can never be argued, right? Because these are the basis of the religion, and it is on this basis that if a person rejects any of these muhkamat, if a person rejects any of these established ideas, what do we say? You're out of the fold of Islam. Because it's very possible a person will argue with me about Dajjal, but the argument is never going to be about whether this person is what? Muslim or not. This is something that we're going to take for granted, that this person for sure is 100% Muslim. Now, whether this event or this individual is real, this is a conversation that I'm willing to have. So over here, these non-mass transmitted reports, they are further categorized into different types. So basically you have things that are musnad and you have things that are mursal. What I want to do here is I actually want to step away from the definition, like the legal theory definition, and see what it is that the hadith scholars deal with and how do they identify a hadith and determine if it's sound. So I want to ask you, logically, if a piece of information comes to you, what are the things that I look for to verify that piece of information? Okay, so like there has to be supporting evidence, sure. Credibility, something that's extremely important. How do I establish credibility? So if I'm credibility in terms of a news outlet, like for example, like you have the New York Times, you have CNN, right? You have Fox News, you have the Associated Press. There are so many different news sources that we have. How do I establish if one is credible or not? Right, I ask about those sources, absolutely, right? If I ask about these sources, now it gives me a better idea of how trustworthy these sources are. What else? Okay, their character, and this is something that's extremely important. Are these people known to lie when they share news or when they share information, right? We have an entire section. We have an entire section of news that is dedicated to less trustworthy reports. What do we call them? Conspiracy. Huh? We call that absolutely CNN. So like, not rumors. We call them tabloids. You guys are familiar with tabloids?
I heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, so tabloids are basically a subsect or subsection of news that talk about unverified information. Right, so what they do is they'll share a lot of unverified information, and all of this is known as tabloids. So if you guys ever go to the grocery store, you'll have like, she finds out she's a mother, or she finds out like this person has been cheating on this person. Like, you see a lot of that. They're all speculative reports, right? There's nothing there that can actually be established. And even the American public, they know this to not be verifiable. This is something that's just speculation, and it's more for entertainment purposes than it is to give news or to give information. So you guys talked about something that's very important. Character. Character is something that is fundamental. If I can't trust this person who's in front of me, or I can't trust this agency in front of me bringing me the news, how can I trust the information that they're giving people? Right? This is vitally important. Did the muhaddithin, did the scholars of hadith put similar criteria? Yes. One of the criteria that they put, right? So they have two conditions when they deal with a narrator. One of them has to do with their character. Is this person known to sin? Is this person known to be a liar? Does he have childish behavior? Does he try to stand out? Does he wear clothing that is flagrant? Right? These are all signs for me to not trust this person. What else is important when I have a piece of information? Character for sure, yes.
Memory.
Right? To make sure that the information is accurate. Right, the accuracy of the information. Because is it possible a person who's truthful make a mistake? Absolutely. So if this time after time, how do I prove that this person has solid memory or is relays the information as it is? All right, so I have to look at all of the reports. So what I do is like I'm going to take all of the articles of New York Times, or I'm going to take all the articles of the Washington Post, and I'm going to be like, okay, how consistently are they bringing the information from the source to me? This is a condition that the scholars of hadith also use. So now you're talking about precision, and you're talking about character. If I have somebody who's precise, and somebody who is of upright character, is that enough? Or did the scholars of hadith put more conditions? They put more conditions, and like in sneak preview, they put 3 more. But what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to give me, what do you think? Because we understand precision and good character is something that is fundamental. What else?
The text of the hadith does not contradict the tenets of Islam.
Okay, so that's something that we can definitely talk about when we deal with like nakara, like how to determine whether a hadith is rejected or not. And that has to do, it's more in lines with like either there's going to be an illah or shad, but we'll talk about that. But this is a sub-point to a larger problem, okay? So, again, yes? All right, who did they hear from? We have to make sure, not just who did they hear from, that those people actually what?
Met.
Right, that they actually met. So if yes?
Can you tell the person's character by the people they hang out with?
Of course. It's very indicative. It's very indicative. Yes, Fazia.
Can I go on to what she just said and add, why do you associate child? You use the example of
Childish behavior.
childish
Yeah.
behavior with not credible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, for sure. Why? Because a person who has childish behavior, they don't give a lot of importance to their own character, let alone the information that they're carrying forward. Yes. Yeah.
Isn't that sharing information is consistent with everything else? Like, is that?
Yes. This is very true. This is very good. And this now we're talking about something that's called shudud. All right. So we have here three conditions. We have that this person is precise. We have that this person has good character. This person has heard the next person after him, right? So they actually have a connected chain here. He hasn't gone against what? So if I have the New York Times says that there was something in Trump's safe, which is why the FBI raided it. But then you have the Washington Post, and then you have Fox News, and then you have the Associated Press, and then you have Reuters. All of them say there was nothing there for them to find. So should I trust the New York Times? Even though I know the New York Times, unfortunately, right, to have good character and to be precise. Is it possible that they took a piece of information, whether it be a mistake or otherwise, and they completely narrate against everyone else?
Yeah.
Right, it's definitely possible, and this is what the scholars of hadith call shudud. This is what shadh is. That basically you have a piece of information that now contradicts other pieces of information. So if I have 5 sources here, and I have one source, and this one source is contradicting those 5, who should I trust? Right, I should trust the majority. I should trust the majority. Because, and the reason for that, we'll delve into it a little bit more, inshallah, on why that is. But in general, this is how we deal with information and how we sift through information. We never rely on these unique narrations. It doesn't make sense. That you have like 10 people telling me this and you have one person saying this. That's not how we operate in general. This last condition is also very important. Because I can have somebody who is upright. I can have somebody who is precise. I can make sure that the chain is connected. I can also make sure that this person didn't go against anyone else. Is there still a possibility for what? Still a possibility for a mistake. So you have all of these conditions there, and now you have a possibility that this person made a mistake in what they're narrating. Right? They have all the conditions are there. How do I determine whether a hadith is mu'al, whether a hadith has this defect or has this shortcoming or not? And what is the condition? Where am I going to look for this illah? Where am I going to look for this defect? Am I going to look for it in a hadith that has, or in a piece of information that has weak narrators? So this person is childish, this person isn't precise. Am I going to look for a defect in this chain? Why? It's already defective, right? When you look at it, it's already defective. This last piece, this last condition, this actually helps me decide what? And it helps me determine if these narrators made a mistake. So illah are only of 2 types. The illah, this defect, is only of 2 types. Either the chain is not connected, but it looks, when I look at it, it looks what? It looks connected. Or the attribution isn't prophetic. Meaning that a companion said it, and one of the narrators mistakenly what? Right, he said that it wasn't the companion that said it, but it was the Prophet ﷺ. And sometimes the opposite happens. Now, what are some signs I can look for is exactly what Nazim mentioned. How can I determine if a hadith has a defect in it? By looking at this, this hadith, it fulfills all of these conditions, but what he's saying here, it actually goes against this principle. It actually goes against the verse. It actually goes, even though the apparent, if I look at it superficially, it looks what? It looks sound. It looks sound. So what I'll do is, one of the tools that I have, as a scholar of hadith, I'd be like, and this is something that was unique to them, because they were constantly in contact with prophetic narrations, because they were constantly in contact in how the Prophet ﷺ spoke, that gave them automatically the ear for what? There's some fine-tuning that's definitely there. If I'm spending my entire life with how the Prophet ﷺ speaks, this automatically gives me the ability to what? Right, it gives me the ability to decipher, like, this It's not what? This doesn't sound like he would say this. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Right, this is part of the precision of that science. They would look and they'd be like, okay, this doesn't sound prophetic. And what would they do now is that they would take the time and they would go back and they would investigate the chain. They went back and they investigated the chain and they didn't find any shortcoming. What do they do? You have to look at the text. You have to look, is there a different way for me to understand it? And I use one of the other tools that we had spoken about. What is that tool? Reconciliation. Right? I try to reconcile now this hadith. And if I can't reconcile, what do I do? Either I can do tawaqquf, right? I can stop and say, okay, I don't know. I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know how to bring these two together. Or I can do what? I can do tarjih. I can actually choose one text over the other. You guys with me? Okay. But that's a hadith in a very quick nutshell. Yeah, it was like a hadith one. I want to do a hadith course. I really, I love hadith so much. Yeah.
I suggest you to make a chapter within the
With the usul al-fiqh. Yeah.
This is how it's on YouTube.
Should I do it after the usul?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, khalas. I'll do a hadith course after usul, because it's like so amazing. It's like a
Speciality.
well, I love it. But it's like so basic. Like I'm just getting excited just thinking about it. So anyway, over here, so they have two categories. Basically, it's either connected or it's broken, and these are just very general categories because the types of breaks and the types of connections, there are specific terms to actually define them and how to utilize them. So here he's talking about Sa'id ibn Musayyib, and the reason he mentioned Sa'id ibn Musayyib because Sa'id ibn Musayyib was one of the preferred narrators of who? Who liked to use him? Which Imam? Imam Shafi'i. So Imam Shafi'i had a big preference for this tabi'i. This tabi'i, he's a student of a tabi'i is a student of who? A companion, right? He's a student of a sahabi. So the reason that he actually preferred his reports is why do you think his reports were given preference? So, well, there is a number of reasons. Like there are a number of companions that he sat under, but the unique thing about him is that every single one of his teachers was what? Was a sahabi. Meaning what?
He has first-hand knowledge.
Well, not just first-hand knowledge. Meaning that if he says something, it's most likely what? It's connected at the minimum, at the least to what? To a companion. And the reason that I mention that is because you have some tabi'in, right? You have students of the Sahaba. They sat with Sahaba and they also sat with who? The older tabi'in, right? There are other tabi'in that they sat with. But the unique thing about him is that every single one of his teachers was a companion, and this is why you have preference given to his narrations. Like I said, at the least, what he's saying is most likely a statement of the companion, and what is at the, what did I say, the most likely, or the least likely, the statement of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So methods of transmission, again, this is more mechanism on how hadith were transmitted to another. So basically what would happen is that you would have these gatherings of hadith. And just like we're gathered in the classroom here, there are two ways to do it. You would have the sheikh, he would be sitting up front, and he would read from his text, right? He would have the text here. All these students get a copy of his book. Some of them memorized. Some of them wrote while he was speaking. But what did the majority of people do? They what? They stayed quiet? They sat for the barakah? They would go to paid scribes. So you had individuals who would go, and what they would do is they would take the book of the sheikh, and what would they do? They would actually sit and copy it, and then me, for somebody who wants to go and sit with the sheikh, what would I do to save time?
Hire one of those.
I wouldn't hire him. I would buy his copy. I would buy the copy, and as the sheikh is speaking, if there are any mistakes that the scribe made, what would I do? I would add them in. What if he skipped a hadith? You know what I mean? Like, because when you're reading and you're copying, sometimes you can skip a line, sometimes these things happen. So the student, what would he do? He would take the opportunity to fill in those gaps. He would take an opportunity to fill in the words. And there are different ways that they did this. So the two main ways is that you have the hadith, scholar who's reading this hadith, because now he's transmitting, right? This is during the age of transmission, where people were actively transmitting a hadith. Is the age of transmission, does it still exist today? Are hadiths still being transmitted? No. Age of transmission is over. When did it end? At the era of Tadween. The era of Tadween, the era of compilation is when it actually ended. The scholars with the longest chains are probably, I would say that it probably ended with Hakim. So Imam Hakim, he was the person who authored he was the scholar who authored the Mustadrak. He died 405. That was the last person to do any type of transmission, any active transmission. You have scholars after him who have longer chains, like for example, you have Al-Diya al-Maqdisi in his Hadith al-Mukhtara. He died like 623 or so. He has chains that go up to him to extremely long, like extremely long chains, because you're talking about like 600 years after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So his chains are extremely long. But even his chains, where do you think his chains go to? Right, it goes to existing books. So his chain will go back to, like for example, Imam Bukhari. His chain will go back to Ibn Majah. His chain will go back to Imam al-Nasa'i. His chain will go back to Tabarani. So even the chain between Tabarani and Diya, would you consider that? Would you consider that transmission? No, it's not. It's not actually transmission. You know why? Because he's taking it from a book that has already been written. So when did transmission stop? The moment it was put in a book and it became published. That's when it stopped. So this is when that happened. And you had two ways that this would happen. You would have, if the teacher is reading, then you as a student, you would say, حدثنا. But if a teacher was reading to the student, a student was reading to the teacher, sorry. If a student was reading to the teacher, they would say, أخبرنا. These are just two methods that ahadith were being transmitted. And again, they would happen in gatherings that are similar to this, where you'd have a scholar read, they would go through a bunch of ahadith. Sometimes the gatherings were so large, what would happen is that you would actually have people placed in the back who would relay the hadith being narrated. That's how, so the reason I want you guys to know this is I just want you to understand and get a picture of how our religion was preserved. And the painstaking efforts scholars and students and generations went to in order to preserve this. Yes?
You want to translate حدثنا أخبرنا for everyone to understand?
حدثنا is like we heard, أخبرنا is like we were informed. That's like the main difference between that. And why do we say we were informed? Because this is actually considered more reliable. It's considered higher in grading and status. Why?
Directly from the horse.
Because it's directly from the sheikh's mouth, right? So the sheikh is the one that's speaking, versus the student reading it to the sheikh, and the sheikh kind of, just going along and saying, yes, this is how it is to be read. And the lowest way to carry a hadith forward is something called an ijazah. You guys have heard of ijazahs before, yes? So basically an ijazah is that sometimes you would have, and there are different ways to do this, but just imagine if you had your compilation, you bought it from the scribe, you went to the sheikh, you're like, Sheikh, I want ijazah. He's like, okay, where'd you get this from? You say, well, the scribe, Abdullah, he's the one that did it. The sheikh, he trusts Abdullah. He trusts Abdullah. He's like, okay, no problem. He's like, read to me the first 10 ahadith. So he reads to him the first 10 ahadith, and he says what after that? Ujizuk. I give you permission to narrate what? The 10 hadith? No, the entire book. Do you guys understand? All right. So this is one way. This is considered the weakest transmission. Why? Because he didn't read every single way in hadith. In today, it's even weaker. Why?
Because we get it from Google.
No, nobody gets it. I don't know anybody who gets ijazah from Google. Why is it even weaker today? We're no longer what?
Transmitting.
We're no longer transmitting, right? Transmission is over. Like, you know what I mean? So why is it weaker today? Because we're not transmitting anything. Why is this system still in place? Barakah. Like it is for virtue only, and it is so that so for example, there are brothers in this room, alhamdulillah, they have a number of ijazat. Some of the sisters have some ijazat. The reason is that we want to be connected back to We want to be part of this greater chain, and we want to be connected back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is one of the sunan that we as an ummah have passed down, that is unique to the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Analogy. We went into a lot of detail concerning this. If you want to go back, you're more than welcome to go back and look at the lecture where I talk about this in detail and the different types of qiyas or analogy. And again, he's just talking. We had spoken about this before. Is that you have an asl, you have an illa, and you have a hukm. So, for example, we had alcohol, and the reasoning was what? Intoxication, and the ruling was haram. So basically, how can I draw an analogy off of that? Everything that is intoxicating is haram. All right. And everything that is not intoxicating is. So this is actually a weaker type of qiyas. Why?
Because
this is a weaker type of analogy. So, for example, is pork intoxicating? No. You guys haven't had the right pork. No, I'm saying like pork is not intoxicating, right? Pork is not intoxicating, but is pork haram?
yes.
Yes, absolutely. So this type of analogy is considered weaker because you're doing negation, right? So when you negate something, it's definitely a weaker type of analogy, but it is still considered analogy. He talks about the illah, he talks about the ruling. These are all things, alhamdulillah, that we've discussed previously. So prohibition and permission, you guys know. Istishab or continuity is something that I want to touch on today, and I want to talk about. I'm not going to take time on it, inshallah. So this is what Imam Al-Haramain, he has to say about things that are permissible and things that are not permissible. But basically, there are 2 or 3 arguments on what is called asl hukm al-shay, like what is the base ruling for things. So if I come across anything in the world today, and I see a fruit hanging from a tree, I don't recognize that fruit. What is the ruling on this fruit? It's permissible, right? There are some scholars who will tell you what? They'll tell you the opposite, that it's what? That it's not permissible. They'll tell you the opposite. They'll tell you that it's not permissible. Why? Because they say the foundational ruling is hadr, right? They'll say the foundational ruling is prohibition, but the majority of scholars say that the foundational ruling is permission.
Everything is permissible
unless proven otherwise. Yeah. So you have different like qawaid like this. You have different principles along these lines. So they'll say things like everything is all food is permissible unless proven impermissible. There's another qaida, another foundation that they'll use concerning meat. They'll say all meat is what? Impermissible unless proven permissible, or unless proven otherwise, because of the doubt that is present. So continuity, and I want to give some examples of continuity. Like wudu. What do I mean by this?
Like if you did wudu and you don't remember for sure if you have broken it or not, it's still valid.
It's still valid. Absolutely. If I know I didn't make wudu. I'm sorry? Right, not just I have to make it. Like if I know I woke up and I just left the house, then I assume about myself that I what? I didn't have wudu, right? That state has continued with me. Like I didn't magically come into wudu, right? Like or like my son, mashallah, has iron wudu, right? The unbreakable, the unbreakable wudu. So he wakes up with wudu. Like marriage. Why this example? It has to be explicitly broken. So, and what do I mean by this? If I have a woman come to me and she's like, my husband divorced me, and the husband's like, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. I'm being very honest. In this situation, what applies? Istishab. Because they were, for sure they were what? Married. Right? For sure they were married. So that is going to be the assumption going forward. Unless you have something that is clear to show that they are not married. But if they're not, the opposite. Right? So a guy, he holds onto a girl's hand and they're like, yo, what are you doing? He's like, this is my wife. Can that work? You guys don't do it right, that's why. No, no. Why it can't work? Why? Because they were never married, right? The default was that they were never married, and that is the state that is going to continue.
What do you do when?
And for those that are never married, may Allah aid you guys.
What do you
Yeah.
do when the girl says she's divorced and the guy says no?
So it's istishab.
So
If a woman claims that she's divorced and the husband says no, I never divorced her, then what is the ruling on them? Are they are what? They're still married. They're still married. They're still married. طيب, someone is lost. I can't. No. Yes. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, in general, the divorce in Islam is in whose hand? It's in the man's hand. It's in the man's hand. Does this mean that women are trapped in marriage? No, absolutely not. Right? There are ways out. There are different ways out for them. But inshallah, when we get to mu'amalat, when we get to marriage and divorce, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
We were talking about the hadith. The hadith, you say it has to be through this person, has to be church.
Yeah.
It has to be investigation. That means if you talk about hadith, that means they agree all.
No. Because the thing is, how come you have one hadith and then this scholar says it's sahih and this scholar says it's life? Why? What happened? Same hadith.
How you
They
go?
didn't agree. That means they didn't agree.
They didn't agree on what?
The methodology.
One of the narrators.
The basic,
There's one of the narrators in the hadith, they differed over. And they said, this narrator is the reason that I think this hadith is sahih. And the same narrator, the scholars say, no, because of this narrator, this hadith is life. Right? So I'm sorry, sound and weak. So there's a lot of perspective, even in the hadith sciences. You can have, there's no universal sahih. Right? And if we want to talk about a universal sahih, there's one, and what is that? Not just Bukhari, muttafaq Right? So that which is narrated in Bukhari and Muslim, this by agreement, everybody agrees like, okay, no, if it's in Bukhari and Muslim, then it is definitely sound. Right? It is definitely sound. But if it's individually in Bukhari, it depends, because not every hadith Imam Bukhari brings in his Sahih is he even intended to be Sahih. And you can, if you know
Muslim is the same, like.
Muslim, yeah. So Muslim